Life often throws us challenges in the most unexpected ways. And for Ethan Blake, a man accustomed to winning at all costs, one such challenge came on an unforgettable evening. At a glittering New York gala, surrounded by the city's elite, Ethan found himself at the center of a peculiar bet that would unravel the carefully curated world he thought he controlled. Ethan, a self-made tycoon with a reputation for success, had built his empire on confidence and competition. He thrived on the thrill of outmaneuvering rivals, whether in business or personal life. But when his lifelong friend, Daniel Harris, leaned in with a smirk and said, "I dare you to step out of your perfect little bubble," Ethan couldn't resist. "What's the wager?" Ethan asked, his tone sharp, already calculating his next move. Daniel raised his champagne glass, his grin widening. "Marry someone who isn't your usual type. Not a supermodel. Not a high society darling. Someone real. Stay married for 6 months. $1 million awaits the winner." A hush fell over their circle of friends as eyes darted between the two men. Ethan, never one to back down from a challenge, raised an eyebrow. "You've got yourself a deal." But what Ethan didn't realize was that this wasn't just another game for him to win. This bet would pull back the curtain on his carefully constructed life and force him to confront the man he indeed was. Little did he know that the woman Daniel had in mind, Amelia Richards, was not just different. She was someone with a story, resilience, and secrets of her own. What began as a simple wager would soon become the most complex battle Ethan had ever faced. One that couldn't be won with money or charm. What would you do if your life was turned upside down by a single decision? Could you change, not for a prize, but for something far more valuable? Stay tuned as the story unfolds, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating narratives that explore the depths of human connection and redemption. Ethan Blake prided himself on control over his businesses, relationships, and the air of confidence he exuded. So, when Daniel revealed the woman he had in mind for the bet, Ethan didn't flinch. But when he saw her file later that week, he hesitated for the first time. Amelia Richards wasn't anything like the women he typically surrounded himself with. She wasn't from high society, didn't grace magazine covers, and her lifestyle wasn't curated for social media envy. Amelia was a fiercely independent small business owner who ran a bookstore and community center in Brooklyn. Her life revolved around helping people, not advancing social status. Ethan's assistant handed him the file with a sly smile. "She's certainly different," she said, glancing at Ethan's expression. "Different is putting it mildly," Ethan replied, scanning the details. Amelia had no interest in luxury, no patience for pretense, and, most importantly, no tolerance for people like Ethan Blake. His intrigue only deepened as he reviewed her background. Amelia had grown up in modest circumstances, the only child of parents who had instilled a relentless sense of self-worth in her. She wouldn't bend to the whims of a man like Ethan, not easily, at least. Their first meeting was set for an upscale restaurant in Manhattan. Ethan arrived early, as always, ensuring everything was in place. But when Amelia entered, he realized immediately that she was different. She didn't walk in with the timid hesitation he expected. Instead, she moved with quiet confidence, her posture straight, her gaze unflinching. "You must be Mr. Blake," she said, extending her hand with a firm grip. "And you must be Amelia Richards," Ethan replied, masking his surprise. Their conversation was anything but typical. Amelia wasted no time addressing the elephant in the room. "I know why we're here. I know about the bet," she said bluntly, her tone unwavering. Ethan leaned back in his chair, hiding his shock behind a practiced smile. "And yet you agreed to meet me. Why?" Amelia's eyes narrowed, her lips curving into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Let's just say I have my reasons. But if you think this will be easy, Mr. Blake, you're mistaken. I'm not here to be impressed or controlled." Her words were a challenge, and Ethan found himself unexpectedly intrigued. He had expected someone who would play along and eventually fall for his charm. But Amelia was different, and he realized that this bet would be more complicated than he had ever anticipated. The days following their meeting were a whirlwind of strategy for Ethan. He was used to navigating the boardroom, where deals were won with cunning and persuasion. But Amelia wasn't a deal to be closed. She was a fortress to be understood. Their second meeting was entirely on Amelia's terms. She chose a simple cafe in her Brooklyn neighborhood, a stark contrast to the glamour Ethan was accustomed to. When he arrived, she was already seated, sipping tea, her demeanor as composed as ever. "Downgrading from five-star restaurants, are we?" Ethan said as he sat down, attempting to inject some fun. "Sometimes simplicity offers more clarity," Amelia replied, her tone neutral but pointed. Their conversation meandered through surface-level topics: books, coffee preferences, the changing seasons, but Amelia quickly redirected them to their arrangement's core. "If we're going to do this," she said, placing her cup down deliberately, "there are conditions." Ethan smirked. "Let me guess, you're not interested in my money." "Correct," Amelia replied sharply. "I also won't tolerate manipulation. I have my life, my work, and my independence. I won't give those up for anyone, not even for 6 months." Ethan leaned forward, intrigued by her firmness. "And what do you expect from me?" "Honesty," she said without hesitation. "If we're going to play this game, I want the rules to be clear. You may see this as a game, but for me, it's an opportunity to show you that not everything is about control or wealth." Her words struck a nerve Ethan didn't even know he had. For the first time in years, he faced someone who didn't care about his status or power, and it unnerved him. In the weeks that followed, Ethan found himself in unfamiliar territory. Amelia's rejection of his usual tactics forced him to adapt. He sent her flowers, only for her to donate them to the local library. He offered her exclusive invitations to high-profile events, which she politely declined. But it wasn't just her resistance that frustrated him, it was her independence. Ethan had always been drawn to women who admired his success and played into his carefully constructed world. Amelia, however, was content to live on her terms. Ethan couldn't help but feel a growing admiration for her. She wasn't a conquest. She was a puzzle that refused to be solved. At the same time, Amelia began to see glimpses of the man behind the arrogance. In his quieter moments, when he wasn't trying to impress her, Ethan showed a vulnerability that surprised her. But she kept her distance, unwilling to let her guard down. Ethan Blake was not used to losing. Yet, as weeks turned into months, he began to feel as if he were engaged in a battle he had no strategy for. His every attempt to sway Amelia Richards, whether through lavish gifts, exclusive experiences, or subtle persuasion, was met with a calm resistance that infuriated and intrigued him equally. Amelia remained unmoved by the trappings of his wealth. She went about her life with a quiet determination that seemed immune to his efforts. To Ethan, her defiance was a puzzle he couldn't solve. To Amelia, his persistence was a challenge she was determined to withstand. Their interactions became a chess game, each move calculated, each response deliberate. Ethan began pushing boundaries. When Amelia insisted on continuing her work at the community center, Ethan offered to fund the entire operation if she would stay home instead. "I don't need your money, Ethan," she said firmly. "This isn't about funding. It's about purpose. You wouldn't understand." Her words stung not because they were unkind but because they were true. Ethan couldn't understand. His world had always revolved around money and power. The purpose was unfamiliar to him, and Amelia's devotion to hers fascinated and frustrated him. But Amelia wasn't without her struggles. Beneath her composed exterior, she grappled with the memories of her father's downfall and the pain it had caused her family. Every interaction with Ethan reminded her of the corporate greed that had shattered her life. She had agreed to this bet not for the money but for the chance to confront the man behind the empire that had destroyed her father's dreams. What she hadn't anticipated was the man himself. Arrogant, yes, but also capable of unexpected moments of sincerity. Those moments disarmed her, making her question whether Ethan was indeed the villain she had painted him to be. Ethan's frustration peaked one evening during a tense dinner at his penthouse. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words as the city lights glittered in the background. Amelia sat across from him, her expression calm but guarded. "I don't understand you," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence. Any other person would be thrilled to have what I'm offering. Why do you keep pushing me away? Amelia set down her fork and met his gaze. Her eyes, steady and steadfast, held a depth of emotion Ethan wasn't prepared for. Because I don't want what you're offering, Ethan, she said quietly. Your wealth, your lifestyle, it means nothing to me. What I want is something you've never given anyone. Accountability. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and Ethan felt the weight of her conviction for the first time. Accountability for what? He asked, his voice tinged with frustration and curiosity. Amelia hesitated, her hands gripping the table's edge as if bracing herself. For what you did to my family, she said finally, her voice steady but filled with pain. My father owned a small business that you crushed without a second thought. Your empire grew and we lost everything. My father couldn't live with the shame, and he took his own life. Ethan froze, her words cutting through him like a blade. He searched his memory, trying to recall the details of the countless deals and acquisitions that had built his empire. But Amelia's father was just one name among many, one casualty in a career defined by ruthless ambition. I didn't know, he said, his voice hollow. No, you didn't, Amelia replied, her tone laced with bitterness. Because people like you never care to know. You destroy lives and move on without a second glance. But this time, Ethan, you'll face the consequences. The room fell into a heavy silence. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt powerless. Amelia wasn't just a woman he wanted to win over. She was a living reminder of the damage he had caused, a mirror reflecting his darkest parts. Ethan spent the next few days in turmoil. Amelia's words echoed in his mind, forcing him to confront a reality he had long ignored. He began to question everything, his success, his values, and the legacy he had built. Meanwhile, Amelia wrestled with her own emotions. She confronts Ethan not to gain his sympathy, but to make him understand the pain he has caused. Yet, seeing the shock and regret in his eyes stirred something unexpected. A flicker of hope that perhaps, deep down, Ethan was capable of change. But hope was a dangerous thing. Amelia knew forgiveness couldn't come quickly, and rebuilding trust was even more challenging. Ethan would have to prove himself, not with words or grand gestures, but through actions that spoke to the man he could become. The revelation of his actions haunted Ethan Blake. Amelia's words had shattered the foundation of his self-perception, exposing him to the harsh truth of the man he had become. He couldn't sleep. Every quiet moment was filled with guilt and regret. This newfound vulnerability was unfamiliar and deeply unsettling for a man used to controlling his destiny. Ethan began to take the first tentative steps toward change. His transformation wasn't born of a desire to win Amelia over. It was something more profound, a need to reconcile the person he had been with the person he wanted to become. His first move was to revisit the records of the deal that had destroyed Amelia's father. Late one night, Ethan pored over old contracts, emails, and financial reports in the quiet of his penthouse office. He found Richard Richards, owner of a small but promising manufacturing company. The acquisition had been ruthless, driven by profit margins without regard for the human cost. Ethan sat back in his chair, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. How many others had he crushed in his pursuit of success? Determined to take action, Ethan reached out to the families whose lives had been affected by his business dealings. He began meeting with them individually, offering financial compensation and personal apologies. Each meeting was a humbling experience, and Ethan quickly realized that money couldn't undo the damage he had caused. One afternoon, Ethan visited the widow of a former business owner whose company he had dismantled years ago. She opened the door cautiously, her expression guarded. "I'm Ethan Blake," he said, his voice subdued. "I came to apologize." She stared at him long before stepping aside to let him in. Over tea in her modest living room, Ethan listened as she recounted her family's struggles after losing their livelihood. Her words were painful, but she accepted his apology with quiet dignity. She hesitated when Ethan handed her a check to help rebuild what he had taken. "I'll accept this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Not because it erases what you did, but because it shows that you're trying to make things right." Ethan left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose. He couldn't change the past, but he could dedicate himself to creating a better future for others and himself. While Ethan worked on redeeming himself, his relationship with Amelia remained distant. She observed his efforts from afar, her guarded heart refusing to trust him fully. But she couldn't deny that something was shifting. Amelia noticed the subtle changes in Ethan's behavior. He no longer carried the air of arrogance that had once defined him. Instead, there was a quiet determination, a vulnerability that was both unexpected and disarming. One evening, as Amelia closed the community center, she found Ethan waiting outside. He held a box of books, his expression uncharacteristically sheepish. "I thought these might be useful," he said, handing her the box. Amelia raised an eyebrow but took the box, glancing inside. It was filled with new books she had mentioned in passing during their conversations. "Thank you," she said, her tone neutral but tinged with curiosity. Ethan hesitated before speaking again. "Amelia, I can't undo what I've done, but I'm trying to improve. Not just for you but for myself. I hope you'll give me the chance to prove that." Amelia studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Actions speak louder than words, Ethan," she said finally. "Keep showing me who you are now, not who you were." The barriers between them began to soften, though slowly and with caution. Ethan continued to make small, thoughtful gestures, leaving fresh coffee on the counter in the mornings, volunteering at the community center, and listening attentively when Amelia spoke about her work. One evening, after a particularly long day, Amelia found Ethan fixing a broken bookshelf at the community center. She paused in the doorway watching him work. Something about the way he carried himself now, unassuming and genuine, stirred something within her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, stepping into the room. Ethan straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Because I want to help," he said simply. Amelia folded her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "And what do you get out of it?" "Maybe nothing," Ethan admitted. "But maybe it's not about getting something. Maybe it's about doing what's right." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, Amelia felt the slightest crack in her defenses. The tension between them reached a pivotal moment one rainy evening. Amelia was standing on the balcony of Ethan's penthouse, watching the city lights through the haze of rain. Ethan joined her, carrying a cup of tea. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "I thought you might want something warm." Amelia took the cup, her fingers brushing his briefly. They stood silently for a long moment, the sound of the rain filling the space between them. "Ethan," Amelia said, her voice soft but steady, "I've seen you change, and I respect what you're trying to do. But respect isn't the same as trust." Ethan nodded, his expression somber. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'll keep trying, Amelia, for as long as it takes." Amelia turned to look at him, her eyes searching his. For the first time, she saw not the man who had destroyed her family, but someone fighting to redeem himself. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. Amelia Richards found herself in unfamiliar territory. For years, her anger had been her armor, protecting her from the pain of her father's death and the life that had crumbled around her family. But now, seeing Ethan Blake's efforts, his humility, actions, and unrelenting determination, was chipping away at the walls she had built. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But for the first time, she considered the possibility that Ethan might not be the man she had once despised. Ethan, for his part, continued to walk the tightrope of redemption. He knew that a single misstep could undo everything he had worked for, and he tread carefully. He no longer sought to impress Amelia with grandeur or material gestures. Instead, he focused on the small, meaningful actions that might one day earn her trust. One evening, Amelia invited Ethan to the community center's book club, a modest gathering of residents who met weekly to discuss literature. To her surprise, Ethan showed up on time and with a book in hand, To Kill a Mockingbird. As the group delved into the story's themes of justice and morality, Ethan found himself deeply engaged in the discussion. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, not as a businessman or a wealthy tycoon, but as a person confronting the weight of his choices. After the meeting, Amelia pulled him aside. "I wasn't expecting you to read the book," she admitted faintly. Ethan shrugged, his expression earnest. "If I'm going to understand you, I need to start understanding the things that matter to you." Her heart softened at his words, though she was careful not to let it show. "Keep reading," she said simply, leaving him with the slightest glimmer of approval. But progress was never a straight path. As Ethan worked to rebuild trust with Amelia, shadows from the past began to resurface. One afternoon, while organizing old files at the community center, Amelia came across a letter from her father shortly before his death. The words were raw, filled with anguish and despair. In the letter, her father blamed himself for the company's failure and expressed his regret for not being able to provide for his family. He mentioned Ethan Blake by name, describing him as embodying corporate greed. Reading the letter reopened old wounds for Amelia. That evening, when Ethan arrived at the penthouse with a bouquet of peonies, her favorite flower, she couldn't accept them. "Not tonight," she said, her voice tight with emotion. Ethan frowned, sensing her shift in mood. "Amelia, did something happen?" She hesitated, then finally met his gaze. "I found a letter from my father," she said. "It reminded me of everything I've been trying to move past. And it reminded me of who you used to be." Her words cut deep, but Ethan didn't waver. "I can't erase what I did," he said softly, "but I can spend the rest of my life trying to improve. For you, for him, for everyone I've hurt." Amelia nodded, though her heart remained heavy. "I need time, Ethan. I need space to process this." "I'll give you as much time as you need," he promised. As the weeks passed, Ethan kept his word, giving Amelia the time and space she needed. But the distance between them was painful, starkly contrasting to the connection they had begun to build. Ethan threw himself into his work of redemption, meeting with more families and quietly funding the community center's expansion. One evening, Amelia returned to the penthouse late, exhausted from a long day. Surprisingly, she found Ethan in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, gesturing to the table where he had set 2 plates of pasta. Amelia hesitated before sitting down. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," Ethan replied, his tone sincere. As they ate, the conversation turned unexpectedly personal. Ethan opened up about his childhood, revealing a side of himself Amelia had never seen. He spoke of his struggles to prove himself in a world that valued success over humanity, and how his drive to win had closed his eyes to the cost of his actions. "I thought that if I built an empire, I'd finally feel worthy," Ethan admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "But all it did was make me lose sight of who I wanted to be." Amelia listened in silence, her heart softening despite herself. She realized that Ethan wasn't just trying to win her forgiveness. He was grappling with his demons, seeking redemption for himself as much as for her. Inspired by Ethan's vulnerability, Amelia made a surprising decision. She invited him to join her at the community center's next outreach event, a fundraiser for struggling local businesses. At first, Ethan felt out of place among the modest crowd, but he quickly found his footing. He spent the evening talking to small business owners, listening to their stories, and offering advice from his years of experience. By tonight's end, Amelia couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. Ethan had stepped into her world, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a genuine participant. As they walked back to the car, Ethan turned to her. "Thank you for inviting me," he said. "It means a lot that you're willing to let me be part of this." Amelia smiled faintly. "You're starting to show me that you're more than the man I thought you were." It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness, but a step forward, a fragile truce that hinted at the possibility of something more. As their relationship evolved, Ethan and Amelia navigated uncharted territory. For Ethan, proving his transformation was genuine was the challenge. For Amelia, it was the struggle to let go of the pain that had defined her for so long. Their journey was far from over, but they were beginning to build something fragile yet promising. A foundation not of grand gestures but mutual respect and shared growth. Just as Ethan Blake and Amelia Richards began to find a fragile balance, life tested their resolve in unexpected ways. Amelia's growing willingness to see Ethan as more than the man who had shattered her family's world was challenged by an unforeseen complication. A figure from Ethan's past who had no intention of letting him change. It started with an article. One morning, while sipping her coffee at the community center, Amelia saw Ethan's face plastered on the front page of a financial journal. The headline read, "The Empire of Blake, Redemption or Manipulation?" The piece dissected Ethan's recent efforts to repair his reputation, questioning whether his actions were genuine or part of a calculated strategy to rebuild his business image. Amelia couldn't shake the doubts the article planted in her mind. Though Ethan's actions had seemed sincere, the reminder of his past ruthlessness made her question whether she had been too quick to let her guard down. When Amelia confronted Ethan about the article, he reacted with frustration and vulnerability. "I can't control what people write about me," he said. "But I'm not doing this for publicity. I'm doing it because I need to make things right. With you, with everyone I've hurt." "You've said that before," Amelia replied, her tone sharp. "But how do I know it's not just another performance?" Ethan hesitated, the weight of her doubt pressing down on him. "You don't," he admitted finally. "All I can do is keep showing you who I am now. Whether you believe me is up to you." An unexpected visitor. As tensions rose, another storm brewed in the background. One evening, while Ethan was out attending a charity event, Amelia answered the door to find a well-dressed woman standing on the penthouse threshold. "Is Ethan home?" the woman asked, her voice smooth but cold. "Who's asking?" Amelia replied, her tone wary. "I'm Sylvia Morgan," the woman said, her red lips curling into a smile. "An old acquaintance of Ethan's." Sylvia exuded power and poise, the kind of person who commanded attention when she walked into a room. Amelia invited her in reluctantly, sensing trouble. When Ethan returned later that night, he froze at the sight of Sylvia sitting in his living room. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice tight. "I came to see how you're doing, darling," Sylvia said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You've been making quite the spectacle of yourself lately. Charity work, apologies, redemption tours. It's so unlike you." Ethan's jaw clenched, and Amelia watched the exchange with growing unease. It was clear that Sylvia represented a part of Ethan's life he had tried to leave behind, a part that threatened to unravel his progress. When Sylvia finally left, she did so with a parting shot. "Don't forget who you are, Ethan. You can't escape it, no matter how hard you try." Her words lingered, sowing doubt in both Ethan and Amelia. Sylvia's visit left a rift between Ethan and Amelia. For days, the penthouse was filled with a tense silence as Amelia grappled with her fears, and Ethan struggled to reassure her. "You should have told me about her," Amelia said one evening, breaking the quiet. "There was nothing to tell," Ethan replied. "She's part of my past, not my present." "But your past keeps showing up," Amelia countered. "How do I know it won't pull you back in?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his every movement. "Because I don't want that life anymore," he said firmly. "I want something real, something with you." Amelia's resolve wavered, but her doubts remained. She needed more than words. She needed proof. The opportunity for proof came sooner than either of them expected. Sylvia, unwilling to let go of her influence over Ethan, began sabotaging his efforts to rebuild his reputation. She spread rumors that his apologies were insincere and leaked confidential documents to the media that painted him negatively. When Ethan discovered what she had done, he faced a choice: retaliate with the same ruthless tactics he had once relied on, or confront Sylvia directly and risk further damage to his reputation. Ethan chose the latter. He met Sylvia at an upscale bar, where their conversation quickly turned heated. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan demanded. "What do you gain from tearing me down?" Sylvia smirked, swirling her drink. "You don't get to reinvent yourself, Ethan. People like us don't change. You can pretend all you want, but deep down, you're still the same man who built an empire at any cost." Ethan's reply was quiet but persistent. "You're wrong. I've changed and spend the rest of my life proving it." He walked away without another word, leaving Sylvia behind. It was a small victory that marked a turning point in Ethan's journey. When Ethan returned home that night, he found Amelia waiting for him. She had watched the media frenzy unfold, uncertain whether Ethan would emerge unscathed. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and concern. "I told her I'm done with that part of my life," Ethan said simply. "And I meant it." For the first time, Amelia saw the depth of Ethan's commitment to becoming a better man, not just to her. It wasn't a grand gesture or a public display. It was a quiet, personal victory that spoke volumes about who he was becoming. Amelia stepped closer, her defenses softening. "Maybe I've been too hard on you," she admitted. "Maybe I've been holding on to my anger because it's easier than letting go." "You have every right to feel like you do," Ethan said. "But I'll keep trying, Amelia. I'll keep showing you I'm not the man I used to be." At that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the beginning of trust, fragile but honest. Ethan Blake was a man transformed. He no longer sought Amelia's approval through grand gestures or flashy displays of wealth. Instead, he immersed himself in actions that reflected the man he was striving to become. His transformation, however, was far from complete, and both he and Amelia knew it. One morning, as Amelia prepared to head to the community center, she found Ethan in the living room surrounded by papers. "What are you doing?" she asked, setting down her bag. "I'm restructuring the foundation," he said without looking up. "What foundation?" Ethan paused and looked at her, a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "I've decided to start a nonprofit. It's time I used my resources to help rebuild the lives of the people my empire destroyed, starting with the families affected by my past business practices." Amelia was taken aback. "This isn't just for show?" she asked cautiously. "No," Ethan said firmly. "It's for them. And maybe for me too. I need to know that I'm capable of doing something good, not for profit, not for image, but because it's the right thing to do." His sincerity touched something deep within Amelia, though she remained guarded. "If you're serious about this," she said, "I'll help you. But only if you're ready to face the truth about what you've done, not just the parts you think are easy to fix." "I'm ready," Ethan said, his voice steady. The foundation became a joint effort, with Amelia offering her insights into the struggles of small business owners and Ethan navigating the logistics of funding and organization. Together, they visited families, sat in living rooms, and listened to stories of loss and resilience. One day, they met George Turner, who had lost his livelihood when Ethan's company bought out his small business years ago. George greeted them skeptically, his arms crossed as they stood in his modest home. "What are you doing here, Blake?" George asked, his tone sharp. "Come to throw some money at me and call it even?" "No," Ethan said, his voice calm. "I came to apologize. And to listen." George stared at him, disbelief etched on his face. Slowly, he began to share his story, how the loss of his business had forced him to sell his home, how his family had struggled to make ends meet. Ethan listened without interruption, the weight of George's words settling heavily on his shoulders. When George finished, Ethan stood. "I can't undo what I did," he said, "but I'd like to help rebuild what you lost, if you'll let me." George hesitated before extending his hand. "It's a start," he said gruffly. Amelia watched the exchange, a glimmer of hope stirring in her heart. For the first time, she saw that Ethan's transformation wasn't just surface level. He was willing to confront the darkest parts of his past to build something better. As the months passed, the foundation flourished. Ethan's dedication to the project earned him respect from those he had wronged, and Amelia, who began to let go of the anger she had carried for so long. One evening, as they sat on the penthouse balcony, the city lights shimmering in the distance, Ethan turned to Amelia. "I know I've said this before," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I want to repeat it. I'm sorry for what I did. To your family, Father, and you. I can't undo the pain I caused, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to honor his memory and make things right." Amelia looked at him, her expression severe but soft. You've come a long way, Ethan, and I see the man you're becoming. But forgiveness isn't a destination. It's a journey, and I'm willing to take that journey with you. Ethan reached for her hand, his heart swelling with gratitude. That's all I could ever ask for. Several weeks later, Amelia began to feel unwell. At first, she dismissed it as stress from her work at the community center and the foundation. But when the symptoms persisted, she visited her doctor. The news left her stunned. She was pregnant. When she told Ethan, his reaction was joyful and disbelief. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Amelia nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I wasn't expecting this, but maybe it's the universe giving us a fresh start." Ethan pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by the prospect of becoming a father. "I'll be the best father I can be," he promised. "For you, for our child, for us." Ethan decided to propose again as their relationship deepened, this time for love, not obligation. On a quiet evening, he knelt before Amelia in the community center garden, where they shared many moments of growth and understanding. "Amelia Richards," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you've shown me what it means to care truly and change. I love you and want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Will you marry me?" Again, Amelia smiled through her tears. "Yes, Ethan. But this time we do it as equals." Their second wedding was a small, intimate affair, held in the community center garden surrounded by friends, family, and the people whose lives they had touched. There was no grandeur, no spectacle, just love, redemption, and the promise of a better future. Years later, Ethan and Amelia stood in the same garden, now with their young daughter playing at their feet. The foundation had grown into a thriving organization, helping countless families rebuild their lives. Amelia looked at Ethan, a smile playing on her lips. "Who would have thought it all started with a bet?" Ethan chuckled, pulling her close. "The best bet I ever made." Their journey had been one of pain, growth, and, ultimately, love. A reminder that redemption is always possible, and that even the most broken lives can find healing and hope. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more narratives about love, forgiveness, and the power of transformation. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.